So today I've got something a little bit different for people to look at. This is a late 2006 iMac that I was given as a non-working PC. I was going to tear it down for parts, but after a bit of investigation I cracked the case open, found that there was lots of different bits missing, things unplugged, things like that. So I put it all back together again as best I could, threw in an old stick of memory because that was missing, and it worked. So I thought, why not rebuild it, maybe upgrade it, get it a bit faster. So I've already had the case off and I've found the missing parts. There's a few things wrong with it. There was no memory, so I've managed to get hold of some other memory. This was out of my memory box. It must have come out of a laptop at some point, but it's actually perfect for this machine. It was also missing the memory port cover, so I managed to pick up another one of these from eBay. It was about £5. The operating system wasn't on the hard drive. It had been reinstalled with Ubuntu at some point in its life, so I've managed to get hold of a copy of the Mac OS Snow Leopard, which was probably what would have been on this machine at the time. It's quite age appropriate. And I found that the DVD drive, it doesn't work very well. It's actually that side. It doesn't work very well. The discs get stuck in it. It does read fine. I managed to get things running, but it's not brilliant. So what I've done is I've bought an external drive here. Now this is a slot loading drive, very similar to what's in this machine, but in actual fact it's identical inside than it is in the one in the machine. So what I'm thinking of doing is cracking this open, actually taking the drive out and replacing the drive that's in there, and that way it'll be as it was new. I'm also going to upgrade the hard drives. The hard drives are very noisy mechanical drive. It's a 250 gig and it's not really great, so I'm going to be putting an SSD in this. So what I'll need is also a tray. So the SSD drives, they're 2.5s, whereas there's 3.5 in that, and this tray will actually adapt it, and that's what I'm going to be doing. So I think the first thing we're going to do is crack all the case open, get it flipped round and start making the changed parts. I've taken the front frame off. It's pretty simple really. There's 4 screws at the bottom. Fortunately on this one they were actually missing anyway, so I'd need to replace them, and it just basically levers off. What you're left with is, you can see the screen and some of the components. Now there's supposed to be some plastic covering around this, but that was obviously missing too because somebody had been in there and tampered around. And the screen is the first thing that needs to come out. Now the screen is held by 4 bolts in each corner. They're hex bolts, so you have to find a specific drive to do it, but I've managed to get them out, and the screen will technically just lift out. Now there's 2 cables this side and there's the main cable at the middle. I've already disconnected the 2 cables here. They're the power cables for the monitor, and what I tend to find is it's easier just to lift it out of place and basically slot it over the back. I don't really need to undo this cable, but I will tape it all back down again as it should have been in the first place. This is the cable that was actually one of the cables that goes to the power unit. But the first thing we're going to tackle is actually the DVD drive. Now the DVD drive has a couple of elements that you have to remove. One is this cable here, which goes to some kind of temperature sensor, which we'll have to replace onto the new drive. Another place is here, which is the cable onto the board. Now they're quite tiny hex screws, and I don't have anything small enough, but I kind of made a screwdriver that will fit and will be able to take things out. This is actually a screwdriver that I've used before for tiny little screws like this. So we disconnect it from the motherboard, and this will simply just pop up and disconnect. Then we've got these 2 brackets here. Now I find them a little bit of a pain, but you can do it generally if you just get a little screwdriver down and just jimmy the bracket back. But I've had this one off before, so it just slots straight out. And that's the DVD drive taken out. So now that I've got the drive out, there's a couple of things that we have to swap over. So I'll crack this open and show you what's inside it. All we need is a little screwdriver and just pry the sides open. Very simplistic design really. These were pretty cheap. I think I paid about £10 for this on eBay. You can pick them up for about the same price. I presume it's because not many people use DVDs anymore. And it's quite a cool device. It actually pretty much matches the more modern Macs. So actually I might keep this case because there's always something useful to use them on. You just take the drive out and you simply unclick it at the back. That's a pretty useful case for something later on. Move that to the side. So we've got the new drive, and it pretty much mimics the old one, but the old one's got a few parts on it that we need to take off. Number one is this clip at the back, which actually mounts it to the motherboard and connects it. It's the same size screws as it was to take it off the motherboard, so we'll just use our homemade tool to be able to remove these screws. Just unplug straight from the back, and then we can switch it over onto the new one. It just simply plugs in there, and we can put the screws back in. The next stage is removing this plastic surround, which is actually just like the mounting bracket for the case. And what we'll need on that is a hex tool to be able to remove these screws. Now I have noticed, taking these apart, that the front doesn't exactly fit with the new one because it's got a few bits that stick out and push in, but it's nothing that we can't just trim off and it'll still fit, to be honest. It'll still work fine. It's also worth making sure, if you're going to do this kind of update, to make sure the drive you're buying actually works when it's tilted up. Back in the day where DVD drives were the thing, not all of them did, and you don't want to be putting one of them in an all-in-one PC because obviously that tilts up and you don't want the disc to get damaged. So looking across the front of this, there's a couple of pegs on the bottom that are actually not needed for the new drive. So what I'll do is I'll just trim them off. And that should be it. So you just fit the new drive in. Actually, before we do that, what we'll do is we'll take a look at this. So this is like a sensor. It looks like a temperature sensor or something that needs to be stuck onto this one again. So we just need to pry that off. Not sure what they use to stick them on, but it's like a thermal sticky pad, which we can find some replacements of. In actual fact, if you look at the hard drive, it also has a similar thing on it. So we've just pried that off. It's still actually sticky, so it'll probably be fine to stick straight back on. Which is, there it is. Then we'll fit the front back on. So the front goes that way round. All we've got to do is line the screws back up on this little tabs on the top of that one. Flip it back round, and these screw holes should line up. I'll actually take the screws out so we can see. I didn't stay on for long, so I'll find some extra sticky pads. So this is actually like a thermal tape. It's a two-sided thermal tape that we can use to stick things on like that. You could just use double-sided tape, but I'm not sure of the thermal qualities of normal double-sided tape, so this one was specifically bought for heat sinks, so it should be quite good. if I can peel the back off it. There you go. So I'll fit this to there. So now we put the front back on. We line it up, and the screw holes should line up too. Which it does. So now we've just got to go around, put all the screws back in, and this drive should be ready for fitting back into the machine. So I've got all the screws back in this now. I've also taken off the little spongy pads that stop any vibrations from the original drive and stuck them to this one. They're simply just pulled off. We've got the thermal sensor still attached with the thermal double-sided tape. So now all we have to do is do the reverse of taking it out and fitting it back in. All we've got to do is just line up the drive, drop it down into its clip system, squeeze on them clips to open them up. It's actually touching the drive at the moment, so I need to push that back. This screw's actually showing. So we tighten the screw in a bit more. We slide it onto the front, slide it down into the case, and it clips in. Reattach this cable here, which simply just clicks onto the board, and then replace those two screws. It's a little bit fiddly when you've got all tiny little screws in these. But I do like the way they put these Macs together. They're very simple to work on. You kind of you open them up and you think that they're going to be very complex and it's going to be very difficult to do things, but they've actually designed them very well for maintenance. I suspect they've done that for their own reasons more than anything. Then we just connect this thermal sensor cable back in. And that's the DVD drive changed. The next thing we're going to tackle is the hard drive. So this is a Seagate 250 gig mechanical hard drive. The hard drive's probably pretty good, to be honest, but it's reasonably noisy, very slow. One of the slowest things that I actually had on the machine when I got it running was every time it come to read the hard drive, you were basically waiting for a long time. So to remove the hard drive, we simply undo these two screws here. With our hex tool. Remembering to keep a little tray of screws so we don't lose anything. And then the drive actually lifts from the one side and slides out of two little rubber bungs the other side. Now this one also has a temperature cable, so just make sure that that's unplugged from the board here, and you just need to feed it back down through, and we'll put that, make sure that goes onto the new drive. And then we unplug the SATA port cables. We've got the SATA power this side and the SATA data that's gone up there, and that's that drive out. Now all we need to do is take this bracket off, take these plugs out, swap them onto the adapter caddy that we've got, install the new drive, and then do the reverse. Now these caddy adapters, they're pretty useful and very cheap. I think this was like £2 from eBay, that's all it was. And they effectively mimic the design of the original with the screws on the sides. The screws in the middle are for a 2.5 drive. Now, I've got an example drive here, and this is going to be the size of the SSD that we're putting in. This is obviously a mechanical one. It basically just fits on like that. But first we'll have to swap those brackets over, and then we can get the mechanical drive, the SSD, installed into it. So this is held on with Torx bits again, a bit smaller than this one. And what we need to do is just remove them off and refit them onto that one. So if you're ever going to be working on a PC like this, or like any PC really, it's really good to get hold of one of these. This was just simply cheap from Aldi, I think. But it's got pretty much every bit that you could ever possibly want. Some of the smallest pieces it doesn't have, and you'll have to buy them specifically. But I generally find they've got pretty much anything that you really need. So there we go, we've got one fit. So just insert the end, and then you can just undo pretty much any nut or bolt. Now these should simply just thread straight back through the original holes, as if they're screws. They might be a bit tight, so these ones are actually creating their own thread as they go through. And that's 2. So that will now replicate in to where the other drive was. All we need to do now is fit the SSD in there, which is pretty simple, and take this temperature sensor off and reinstall it onto the new drive. Now with that, we got the Apple iMac clamps attached to our bay. We can start installing the hard drive. For this we're going to be using an ADATA or ADATA SU630. This is a 240GB SSD, more than enough for this machine, so we don't need much more than that. And it replaces the 250 that came out of it, so it's pretty much on par, but this is going to add a lot more beef to the machine. It's going to boot a lot quicker and it'll be a lot more stable. So to do that, all we have to do is line up the holes on the bottom and insert the screws that came with the tray. So taking our tray, now with the hard drive attached to it, we want to reinstall it back into the machine. It's going to simply just connect as it did before, so we just need to push those 2 pegs in that side and then lower down the other side and insert 2 screws there. Remembering these are hex screws, so we'll need our special tool. We'll simply plug the drive back in. And all the connections fit fine. And then we have to remember to install the little thermal sensor. Now I'm going to use another piece of the double-sided thermal tape that I've got, which will make sure it's nice and secure back onto the drive. And we want to install it round about in the middle because that cable's got to go to there. So what we'll do is we'll feed the cable underneath first. And then we can start lining it up. So it needs to plug back into the motherboard. And then just simply insert it anywhere on the drive so it can detect the temperature. And that's the drive all installed. Now all we need to do is put it all back together again. We should be good to go. So put the screen back together again, and I've inserted the front and locked it all down at the bottom, making sure that I plug the camera in too. Now all we need to do is install the new memory taken this from its original 1 gig to 4 gig, and we're ready to try and install the operating system. The easiest way to install the memory is to be able to flip the monitor over, and then we'll go through that process. So with the memories on these, you've got a slot at the bottom, and it takes 2 sticks. What you need to do is lift the legs out, taking note of where the hole is in the peg and where it is in the machine. You want to just slot the memory down, till it hits a stop. You don't want to try and force his memory down. And then you want to do the same with the other stick. And then these 2 little pegs, as you push them down, will clip the memory in. It's not a very nice sound, but that'll get it in there, and then those sticks are actually installed. And what we do is we replace the panel that I had to buy for a new one, which goes over the top, and just simply screws down with a screwdriver. And now what we need to do is flip it back round and see if we can get it to come on. So the machine's balled back together again, and we've installed a fresh copy of Snow Leopard Mac OS X onto this machine, and it installed really well. It went straight onto the hard drive, not a problem. Overall, it's been a really good build. Everything's actually just worked really well, and that's why I love working on things like this. We've quadrupled the memory. Remember, it didn't come with any memory, but this would have been built with 1 gig, but we've put 4 gig in it now. We've changed the hard drive for an SSD, so it's very quick. And we've changed the DVD drive because the last one was faulty, and we did that for just a simple tenner by buying one of them external ones, and it pretty much just went straight in the machine. I rebuilt everything back into there, plugged everything back in again, so now the camera works, the speakers work, everything actually works really well. And as a system, it's pretty stable, it's pretty quick, it boots up very quickly now, whereas it was before, well, it wouldn't before. And it's super quiet, so even the DVD drive isn't making much noise now. When it's fully spinning, you just get the normal spin noise, whereas before it was a bit crackly. The hard drive isn't grinding away anymore because it's the SSD, so it's really super quiet. And it works really, really well. The one question that I was going to ask though is, obviously the operating system was working really good, but will it play a game? That's usually the question I get asked. And what we've managed to do is actually get a copy of a real good classic, so Call of Duty 2. It's an old game, but this is an old machine, so I wouldn't expect it to play anything really well. But we've got the disc, we've done the install, so we'll pop it in and we'll see how it plays on this old Mac. Obviously we have to use the disc on this version. It takes me back a bit because I even had to put a software code in to get it to work, but we've installed it into our applications folder and we'll kick it off. You have to wait for the disc to spin up, you remember those days. There we go, it's read the disc now. Obviously anything running from disk is still just as slow as it used to be, but anything from the hard drive, and we'll look at how we can get some games on the hard drive of this machine. Actually, we're going to be really quick at loading. Game boots up. I quickly started a game before, but we'll just click resume and we'll see what it can actually produce. The monitor on these don't really go up to anything 1080p style. We can actually check the settings, I think, from inside the game. So if we look at the graphics settings, the maximum we can get this up to is 1680 by 1050, so it must be the maximum resolution of the monitor. 60 Hz. There's not much settings in these older games, but I did max everything out just to see what it'll do. And we'll see how it plays.
If you wish to survive, you will do exactly as I say. Now, walk over to that table and pick up those weapons. You will have to move faster than that, comrade. You will need a real weapon if you wish to kill the fascists. Look at your compass.
Like I say, it's an old game,
It shows the location
but it's playing and it's an absolute classic, so why wouldn't you want to play this again? Now this game cost me 70p. I think if you buy it from the Steam store now for a Windows PC, you'll still pay £10 for it, so for 70p we've got a good game that runs really well.
Always remember to use the star on your compass to reach your current objective.
And that's rebuilding a Mac and getting something useful out of what was actually going to be chucked away. If you want to see another video like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see what we're working on next.